So two separate opinion polls both make grim reading for the Conservatives this morning. An MRP survey by Survation in the Sunday Times predicts the party could win just 72 seats, with Labour achieving a majority of more than 260. The poll puts the Conservatives on 21% of the vote, their lowest share for 5 years. That's also a poll by Savanta. Peter Kellner is a former president of the polling company YouGov. He's with us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
So can you break down this poll for us and tell us exactly the details of what it's saying?
Yeah, what it's showing, and this is one of those MRP surveys, big sample, more than 20,000. It looks at demographics in detail and tries to match each parliamentary seat to those demographics. And what it's saying is that Labour is on course for 456 seats. It's a majority of 262, way beyond anything we've seen since the Second World War. The Conservatives would still be the opposition party on 72 seats, with the Liberal Democrats behind on, let me just check my numbers, 56. Reform will get plenty of votes, but only 7 MPs on this because they don't pile up the support in specific places which they need to win seats. Their vote is all over the place. And therefore not winning many seats. Quite good news for the SNP. According to this poll, the SNP are still ahead of Labour in Scotland and would still have 37 seats. But that's out of line with other recent polls, so we'll see how that goes.
And that is the thing, of course, this is only one poll and they can't be taken out of context. You need to look at trends. But it is interesting because the Sunday Telegraph have a separate poll this morning, which is also putting the Conservatives on 72 seats.
Yes, and I imagine we'll get another YouGov MRP survey in the next few days, and we'll see what that is. But let me just say this: one's got to be cautious with any such projection. Firstly, we don't know for sure if the mechanism they use for persuading votes to seats, how well that works, because we've never been here before in terms of the difference between Labour and Conservative. And secondly, when the Conservatives are around this figure, it doesn't take much, either up or down in their votes, to change a lot of seats. It would only take a further 2% swing to Labour for the Conservatives to be down to 29 seats. They wouldn't be the official opposition. But if they can pick up a couple of points, then they get to more than 100 seats. So in this sort of area where the elastic has snapped and we're not quite sure where it'll end up.
Yeah, it's really interesting that, isn't it? How it can just change a small change here or there can actually have quite a big impact on the number of seats won by a party. Interestingly, the Lib Dems projected, as you say, to get over 50 seats, gaining a lot of seats from the Conservatives. And it looks in this poll very much as if those pickups would be mainly in the southeast and the southwest of England.
That's right, and there seems to be quite a lot of tactical voting going on. But let's just, but this re-emphasises the point. The Liberal Democrats on this poll will have slightly fewer votes than Reform, 11% against 12%, but 56 Lib Dem seats against 7 Reform. Now, the Lib Dems used to complain loudly that the electoral system was weighted against them. It still is to a degree, but they've been getting better and better in recent years in targeting their support where they really need it. And I think that'll pay off this time.
And is there any pattern? Because I know that you've spoken to us before about the way MRP polling is put together. It's quite specific, isn't it, on the seats and the number of people. I mean, well over 20,000 people used here in the polling. Is it clear where in particular the Conservatives are losing out? Is it red wall seats? Is it safe seats? Or is it just kind of across the board?
Oh, it's pretty well everywhere. I mean, look, one word of caution, as I say in my piece in the Sunday Times, when you dig down to individual seats, what you can look at the demographic nature of each seat, and that takes you a very, very long way. What it can't do is deal with very specific local things, like the reputation of the local MP. Maybe there's a row going on with the local council over planning or on a closed hospital. Those very specific local issues don't show up in MRP. So what you will get, even if this MRP is, as it were, the numbers are accurate, you'll find the Tories lose some seats they're predicted to hold and hold some seats they're projected to lose. So I'm always a little bit wary of going when they show a particular seat is very, very close. I would treat that with a little bit of caution.
And when we're talking about specifics of seats, I mean, we've said for several weeks now, haven't we, that there are several cabinet ministers who are really, it's looking very tight in particular areas. This poll in the Sunday Times suggests that some cabinet ministers will lose their seats.
Oh, the biggest casualty by far would be Jeremy Hunt, Chancellor of the Exchequer, because he's on this Salvation MRP poll, he's 16 points behind the Liberal Democrats. Now, even if there are local factors, even if he's stupendously popular as a person, and MRP isn't picking that up, you can't make up a 16-point deficit on this kind of local factor. Turn it around the other way. I reckon if the Conservatives dip below 72 seats, there's a further swing against them. I reckon there are only 3 cabinet ministers who may be in the next parliament, and they're Kemi Badenoch, Suella Braverman, and Laura Trott. The other 20 or so would be out.
Wow. And just seeing as well, I mean, Penny Mordaunt is another one who is named as would lose her seat under this poll. Also Jacob Rees-Mogg, interestingly. But the people on the right of the party looking like they would keep their seats. So, you know, Suella Braverman, Liz Truss, Priti Patel.
Yeah, what you've got, some of the prominent right-wingers may well hold their seats. But if you look at the Conservative Parliamentary Party, a lot of the right-wingers in this past Parliament have been the people who gained those red wall seats 5 years ago, you know, get Brexit done and all that. Those MPs will all be gone, right? So you will get some very prominent right-wingers in a diminished Tory party, but the overall balance may be slightly less right-wing than it has been for the last 5 years.
Really good to speak to you. Thank you so much for talking to us this morning, Peter.
You're welcome.
That is Peter Kellner. He's former president of the polling company YouGov. You can read his piece in the Sunday Times right now. Just goes into a lot more detail than we've had time to discuss here, talking about which parties, the projections here. So Liberal Democrats on for 56 seats, Reform UK for 7 seats, Greens for 1, Labour 456 seats, a majority of 262. And the main headline here, Conservatives could win just 72 seats.
This is quite rare for any of our prime ministers to speak about religion and their own faith. It's something that prime ministers tend to avoid. You'll remember that Alistair Campbell said of Tony Blair, we don't do God. And then, of course, David Cameron described his own Christianity as being like Magic FM in the Chilterns. It sort of floats in and out. And it's seen as, it's seen potentially by those who advise prime ministers as being something, talking about religion as being something that can not necessarily bring people or make people warm to you. They want to know the thinking. I think the thinking is that, people want to know that you're making very clear, rational decisions that are based on the facts in front of you, not based on a particular religious faith. Having said that, it's always good to know more about what guides our politicians, and I think it's a very revealing interview by Caroline in today's Sunday Times. It's well worth a read. The only other thing I would add is that this concept that you could detach yourself from the outcome and you do your duty by what is right, I'm not sure that's going to go down particularly well with many Conservative MPs, because the outcome for them of this disastrous election campaign is that they lose their job. And they don't necessarily have the backup in terms of family wealth that Mr. Sunak has.
Yeah. So this is the quote in Hinduism, and you've heard from the Prime Minister this morning, this concept of duty, which I don't think I can pronounce correctly, but dharma is how it's spelt, which is roughly translated as being about doing your duty and not having a focus on the outcomes of it. You do your duty because it's the right thing to do, and you have to detach yourself from the outcomes of it. He says it's not an easy thing to do. It is interesting, isn't it, Theo? I just wonder, in terms of the principles of faith guiding a politician, it's all well and good saying that, but you will be measured really on what those outcomes are. I suppose that is the electoral reality, particularly in an election campaign. And, we've made reference already this morning to perhaps the other most recent example of religion and faith in politics was Kate Forbes, when she was running to become SNP leader just over a year ago. And actually that was probably quite damaging, certainly at first, to her campaign, but polling in that case showed that the people of Scotland actually respected her for her honesty, and that was what they read into her sharing her faith. Yes,
it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, something that when Rishi Sunak talks about it in this particular context, he's not. It doesn't expand out, or it's not extrapolated out into particular beliefs about particular policies. Christianity has a way, because of course we know much more about it in sort of our own, we know much more about it, is that it has a way of then bringing up questions about what you think of abortion, what you think of same-sex marriages, and the list goes on, and then it becomes quite difficult for politicians to then say, well, how are they guided when those particular areas of their belief then trip over into policy making. I think what Rishi Sunak's talking about, and I think I think it's a good thing, by the way, is that he's talking about the guiding principles rather than any particular belief that he has as a result of his religion that you might then look back on and say, well, why did you make this decision, or why did you make that decision? But I go back to the point. I go back to your point. Actually, this is all about results.
Yeah.
We are talking about the extinction of the Conservative Party, and if Rishi Sunak's saying, well, I'm doing my duty, I'm doing the right thing, and Conservative MPs are having doors slammed in their faces on the doorsteps up and down the country at his decision to A, call the election, B, make a number of blunders, including leaving the D-Day celebrations early, and all the while he's happy they're leading them over the edge of a cliff where they're going to lose their jobs. I'm not sure it's going to go down particularly well that he's saying, well, the outcome doesn't matter, I'm doing my duty, I'm doing what I think is right, when clearly many of those decisions have been the wrong ones.
Yeah, indeed. Right, a couple of other political headlines around this morning, Theo, just to get a thought from you on Rachel Reeves in the Sunday Times. Next week, a black and white portrait of Rachel Reeves will appear on billboards and social media adverts across the country. They're kind of moving her to kind of front and centre of Labour's national campaign. It's interesting, isn't it, to kind of build... at this point, a shadow chancellor into more of is it fair to say, more of a character in an election campaign?
It is, and just think to that image on the front page of the manifesto of Keir Starmer with his glasses, looking like a very stern father. It reminds me of that Michael Douglas film, Falling Down. He's got his sleeves rolled up, and they've tried to produce quite a cultish figure. I think we've got a huge billboard near where I live of that photograph next to his 5 mission statements, and he has been very much the main character that Labour have put forward as an offering in this election. And it now we hear, and it's your exclusive again in the Sunday Times, that Labour want to do the same thing with Rachel Reeves. And of course, that bond between Prime Minister and Chancellor, we know what happened with Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, the friction, the factionalism within the Labour Party during the late 1990s and noughties, and the ongoing saga of when Gordon Brown was going to take over. And I think it's actually a measure of what they're trying to do, is a measure of Keir Starmer's own security in the job. Yeah. That he can say, actually, you know what, Rachel Reeves can have a major part in the latter part, in the second half of this campaign, as somebody we want to put up so that everybody knows who she is. And of course, given what we've seen in terms of the manifesto, the gaps in the manifesto which are going to be filled, the tough decisions that Keir Starmer has talked about making, Rachel Reeves is going to be probably the most prominent other figure in the Labour cabinet during the first 6 months of any Labour administration.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. Theo, thank you very much. Good to speak to you this morning. Theo Usherwood, political commentator for Times Radio. Your thoughts on all of that, very welcome. You can text 87222 and start your message with the word Times.
I was just thinking, one other politician where faith was an issue was, of course, Tim Farron, who resigned as leader of the Liberal Democrats in 2017. Mm-hmm. He actually said that he felt it was impossible to be a committed Christian and lead the party. So that's just another example of faith in politics.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. It's just how we view faith and
I wonder if we view, exactly as Theo just said there, we view Christianity differently because
we're more familiar with it.
We're more familiar with it,
Yeah.
and therefore people think, well, will that affect your view on same-sex marriage? Will that affect your view on abortion, homosexuality, whatever it is? Whereas maybe if it is more of a minority faith in this country, if people don't really understand all of the ins and outs of it, I don't know, or does it just not matter?
Yeah, well, that's the other thing.
Does it just not
and there
matter?
are some of you texting this morning saying, you know, pursue whatever faith you wish, just govern well.